My name is Kalen. I am 60 years old. For 32 of those years, my world was the gentle, rhythmic silence of the Clear Sky Monastery, nestled in the green hills of a country far from the one of my birth. I was a Buddhist monk. My life was a devotion to a single, noble pursuit, the cessation of suffering through the extinguishing of the self. I was a sincere and dedicated seeker of what I believed to be the ultimate truth. My days were a testament to that dedication, a quiet tapestry woven from the threads of discipline and mindfulness. My world was the cool, smooth wood of the meditation hall floor, the scent of sandalwood incense hanging in the still air, the sound of a single bronze bell marking the passage of time. I rose before the sun, my mind trained to greet the day not with desire, but with detached observation. I dedicated hours to silent meditation, learning to watch my thoughts and feelings arise and pass away like clouds in an empty sky, without attachment, without judgment. I studied the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, with the focus of a scholar. I could debate the nuances of the Four Noble Truths, the intricacies of the Eightfold Path. I believed with the full conviction of my intellectual mind that I was on the right path. The path of enlightenment was a logical and elegant solution to the messy, chaotic problem of human existence. The universe, as I understood it, was an impersonal, eternal cycle of cause and effect, of karma and rebirth. There was no beginning, no end, no creator God who stood outside of the system. There was only the system itself, the great wheel of existence. And the only way to escape the suffering of that wheel was to let go of the very thing that bound you to it, yourself, your ego, your desires. It was a noble path, a path of peace, of discipline, of self-control, and I walked it with a sincerity that was the bedrock of my entire being. I was respected in my community. Younger monks would come to me for guidance, and I would offer them the wisdom I had gathered, the philosophical truths that had become the architecture of my reality. I was a man at peace, secure in my understanding of the world, confident that my lifelong pursuit was leading me to the ultimate liberation, the final, blissful emptiness of Nirvana. It happened during a deep meditation session on a quiet afternoon in the late summer. I was seated on my cushion in the zendo, the meditation hall, a place where I had spent thousands of hours over the past 30 years. My posture was straight, my hands were folded, and my focus was on my breath, the simple, rhythmic anchor of my consciousness. I was in a state of deep samadhi, a state of profound concentration where the boundaries between the observer and the observed begin to blur. My mind was still, a calm, clear lake reflecting an empty sky. In this state, thoughts and sensations would arise, but I had long since learned to simply observe them without attachment, like ripples on the surface of the lake, and then let them pass. I first noticed it as a subtle warmth spreading in the base of my skull, a strange and unfamiliar sensation. My training kicked in immediately. I did not react with fear or curiosity. I simply observed. Ah, I thought with a detached clarity, a sensation of warmth is arising. Then came a gentle but insistent pressure behind my eyes. The sensation of pressure is present. My vision began to flicker at the edges, the calm, wood-paneled room in front of me starting to waver. The visual field is changing. I felt no panic. This was the practice, to observe all phenomena, even the dissolution of one's own body, with the same steady and impartial mindfulness. This, I thought, could be it, the moment of transition. The sensations intensified, but there was no pain. It was a great, silent unraveling. The sound of the birds outside the window faded away. The feeling of the cushion beneath me dissolved. My awareness, my point of consciousness, began to lift, to detach from the physical shell that I had called Kalen for 60 years. I felt the intricate web of my identity, my memories, my name, my role as a monk begin to loosen and fall away. This was not a frightening death. As far as I was concerned, this was a graduation. This was the moment I had trained for my entire adult life. The final letting go, the ultimate extinguishing of the self that is the source of all suffering. A sense of profound, triumphant peace filled me. This is it, I thought, a feeling of deep satisfaction washing through my disembodied consciousness. The dissolution of the ego, the great emptiness, the final release, Nirvana. I let go of the last, stubborn thread of my earthly identity, and my consciousness expanded, ready and willing to finally merge and dissolve into the great, peaceful, and impersonal silence of the void. My consciousness, now a free and unbound point of awareness, expanded into what I expected to be the great and final emptiness. I was ready to dissolve, to become one with the formless, timeless void that is the ultimate release from the suffering of existence. But the void did not come. Instead of a static state of non-being, I found myself in motion. A tunnel of brilliant, welcoming light formed around me, a phenomenon I had read about in Western books, but which had no place in the Dharma I had studied so meticulously. My training as a monk urged me to simply observe, and so I did. This was not in the texts. The path to Nirvana was not a journey to a place, but a cessation of place, a dissolving of self. Yet I was undeniably traveling. The light was warm, peaceful, and pulled me forward with a gentle but certain purpose. I emerged not into the formless bliss of non-existence, but into a place of breathtaking, impossible form. I was standing in a garden. The very concept was a contradiction to my beliefs. Nirvana was the extinguishing of all sensory experience, but here, my senses, now spiritual and infinitely more acute, were overwhelmed. I saw flowers blooming in colors that had no name, their hues so vibrant they seemed to sing. The air was filled with a fragrance so sweet and so pure it felt like the very essence of life itself. And there was music, a gentle, harmonious melody that seemed to come not from any instrument, but from the light, the air, and the ground itself. My logical, truth-seeking mind was in a state of profound confusion. This was not the great emptiness, this was the great fullness. And I was not alone. There were figures in the garden, beings made of a soft, gentle light, their forms peaceful and radiant. I thought perhaps they were devas or bodhisattvas, enlightened beings on a higher plane of existence. This, at least, had some parallel in my belief system. But then one figure stepped forward from among the others, and my carefully constructed understanding of the universe shattered completely. He was not just a being of light, he was a person. A distinct, individual, and overwhelmingly personal being. He was tall, with a kind and gentle face, and from him radiated a love so powerful, so personal, and so focused that it defied all my concepts of an impersonal, universal consciousness. This was not the detached benevolence of the cosmos. This was a love that knew my name. He held out his hand to me, an act of specific, personal invitation. As my spiritual hand took his, a surge of that personal love and a powerful, living energy flowed through me. He smiled, a smile of profound warmth and welcome, and he spoke, his thoughts arriving in my mind with perfect clarity. "Welcome, Kalen, I have been waiting for you." The words were a gentle earthquake to the foundations of my soul. I and you. He was affirming my individuality, the very self I had spent a lifetime trying to extinguish. And the words, "I have been waiting for you," implied a plan, a purpose, a creator who had known me before I was. My entire philosophical system could not account for this experience. I stood there, a 60-year-old monk, feeling like a confused child. This loving, personal being seemed to read my thoughts. "I know you have many questions," he said gently. "Come with me and I will show you the truth." We started walking together through that beautiful, impossible garden. As a monk, I had spent my life training my mind to be still, to detach from the distractions of the sensory world. But here, my spiritual senses were alive, and every sensation was a fresh contradiction to my lifelong beliefs. The music that filled the air was not a distraction, it was a form of peace itself. The vibrant colors of the flowers were not an illusion to be overcome, they were expressions of a profound and joyful reality. We walked in a comfortable silence for a moment, and then the man began to speak again, his thoughts arriving in my mind with a teacher's gentle precision. "Kalen, I know you have lived your life with great sincerity and discipline, following the teachings you believe to be right. I could only convey a silent yes, a feeling of pride in my 40 years of dedicated practice rising within me." But then he continued, and his words were the beginning of the great unraveling. "However, there are some fundamental things you need to understand about the true nature of reality, and the path to what you would call ultimate peace. I felt a flicker of intellectual unease. What did he mean? Hadn't I followed the noble eightfold path perfectly? Wasn't the Dharma, the universal law, the final truth? The man stopped and turned to face me, and the love that radiated from him was now mixed with a look of profound compassion, the look a doctor might give before delivering a difficult but necessary diagnosis. Kalen, he said, his thought clear and unmistakable, my name is Jesus. And I am here to show you the truth about the personal Creator God who loves you, and the true path to an eternal life that is not an empty void, but a joyful relationship with Him. The name hit my consciousness with the force of a tectonic plate shifting. Jesus, I was shocked. Of course, I knew of Jesus. In my studies, I had regarded him as a great historical figure, a wise teacher, perhaps even a bodhisattva, an enlightened being who chose to stay in the cycle of rebirth to help others. But in my worldview, he was one of many wise men, a guide who pointed to a path, not the path itself. And he certainly wasn't the singular son of a creator God, because in my understanding, a creator God did not exist. Why was he here? Why not the Buddha? And why was he speaking of a personal God and a relationship when the ultimate goal was the dissolution of all personality, all relationships? Before I could even fully form the questions in my mind, Jesus answered them. I know this is confusing for you, but I ask that you hold your conclusions and simply be the truth seeker you have always been. Keep an open mind as I show you what is real. There are many things you have been taught that are noble, that contain echoes of the truth, but are ultimately not true. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, certainly, a sliver of fear at having my entire life's foundation questioned. But overriding it all was curiosity. The calm, logical, truth-seeking part of my mind, the part that had been honed by decades of meditation, was now faced with an undeniable reality that did not fit its model. The love I felt from this man, this Jesus, was more real than anything I had ever known, and the authority in his presence was absolute. I made a choice, the only choice a true seeker could make. I decided to listen. As we continued our walk through that garden of impossible beauty, I felt a sense of both profound peace and intellectual vertigo. I had agreed to listen, to be the truth seeker I had always claimed to be, but every fiber of my being was braced for the dismantling of my life's work. Jesus began his lesson not with a complex philosophical argument, but with a simple, foundational question that arrived in my mind with perfect clarity. Kalen, in your life, you sought to escape the endless cycle of existence, but did you ever stop to ask how the cycle began? I thought back to the Dharma, to the teachings of an eternal, uncreated universe, a wheel of cause and effect with no beginning and no end. The concept of a beginning of a creation event was a question the Buddha himself had set aside as unprofitable to the path of ending suffering. It was a non-question. But it is the only question that matters, Jesus responded gently, correcting my lifetime of philosophical assumption. For if the universe was not created, then it has no creator. If it has no creator, then it has no purpose. And if it has no purpose, then your belief is correct. Life is indeed just a cycle of suffering to be escaped. But what if your foundational premise is wrong? Before I could even process the weight of his question, the garden around us dissolved. The light, the colors, the music, it all faded into a profound, absolute, and ancient darkness. It was a darkness that was not empty, but was full of potential, a deep and pregnant void. I felt no fear, I knew I was with him, and then I heard a voice. It was not the gentle thought of Jesus beside me. This was a voice that was the very source of all power, a voice that was both thunder and music, a voice that was pure, creative authority. And it spoke 3 words into the void. Let there be light. And in a single, instantaneous, and breathtaking moment, light exploded into being. It was not the chaotic, violent explosion of a scientific Big Bang. It was an intentional, beautiful, and joyful unfurling of existence. I watched, mesmerized, as galaxies were spun into being like a weaver casting a shuttle of stars. I saw nebulae painted across the blackness in colors I had just witnessed in the heavenly garden. I saw planets form and find their perfect, silent orbits. I was not watching a scientific process, I was witnessing an artistic one. This was not a random accident. This was a masterpiece being painted on the canvas of nothingness by a master artist. I understood then, with a clarity that shattered my Buddhist cosmology, that the universe was not eternal. It had a beginning, and that beginning was not a mindless event, but a deliberate, loving, and personal act of creation. The universe is not an impersonal system, Kaelin, Jesus's thought returned, a gentle guide to what my soul was witnessing. It is a personal creation. It did not come from nothing, it came from a someone. A loving Father who is the source of all that is, and who created all of this not by chance, but out of a desire to share his love. The vision then zoomed in with impossible speed, from the cosmic scale of galaxies to a single, beautiful blue and white planet. I saw the creation of life, the teeming oceans, the lush forests, and finally, the creation of man. And I felt the Creator's love for his creation, a love so fierce, so personal, so profound that it was the very energy that held it all together. My entire life I had sought to detach from the world. I now saw that the world was an intentional, beloved creation, brought into being by a personal God. This single revelation, this vision of a purposeful beginning, was the first great crack in the foundation of everything I had ever believed. The vision of the universe being spoken into existence by a personal, loving creator faded, but the truth of it remained, a new and unshakable pillar in my crumbling worldview. My entire life I had believed in an eternal, impersonal cycle. Now I had witnessed a personal beginning. As a logical man, I knew that if the beginning was different from what I had been taught, then the end must be as well. Jesus seemed to follow my train of thought, and he gently but firmly guided me to the next great contradiction. Kaelin, his thought was a teacher addressing a student. You have spent your life trying to escape the wheel of reincarnation, the endless cycle of death and rebirth. You have sought to accumulate enough good karma to finally break free. That is a noble goal born of a desire to end suffering, but the premise, again, is wrong. He then showed me a new vision. I saw what looked like an infinite library, similar to the archives I had seen in other NDE accounts, but this was different. It was a single vast hall, and on the endless shelves were not books, but what looked like glowing, spiritual seeds or orbs of light. Jesus directed my attention to a single, newly formed orb, shimmering with the fragile light of a new life on earth. This is a soul, he explained, a unique, individual, and eternal being created in the image of my Father. I then watched a vision of that soul's entire life play out in a compressed, flashing summary. I saw the soul born as a baby, grow into a child, a teenager, an adult, and an old man. I saw all his choices, both good and bad, all his moments of love and his moments of selfishness. Finally, I saw his body die. I expected, according to my old beliefs, to see that soul's karmic energy be reborn into a new body, a new life to continue the cycle. But that is not what happened. Instead, I saw the man's soul, now free from his body, stand before a great and loving light. There was an accounting, a review of the single life he had been given. His entire existence, his one and only chance, was weighed and measured. Then, based on the choices he had made in that one life, he was welcomed into a realm of eternal joy. There is no cycle, Kaelin, Jesus's voice was filled with a compassionate but absolute authority. There is no endless wheel. There are no second chances, no do-overs. As it is written, it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. One life, that is the precious, terrifying, and beautiful gift my Father gives to every soul. The implications of this truth hit me with a force that was almost physical. If there was no reincarnation, no endless cycle of lives to eventually get it right, then my one life on earth, the one I had just left, was not a dress rehearsal. It was the final performance. The urgency of a single lifetime, a concept I had never truly had to grapple with in my cyclical worldview, was now a stark and terrifying reality. My lifelong quest to escape the wheel was based on a false premise. The true quest, I was beginning to understand, was to live the one, single life I had been given in a way that aligned with the will of the personal creator who had granted it. My goal had been to become nothing, I was now realizing the goal was to become something, a child of God, ready to meet his Father. The revelation that I had only one life, one chance to get it right, was a profound and unsettling shift in my understanding. As a monk, my entire existence had been predicated on the idea of a long, cyclical journey toward enlightenment. Now I understood that it was not a long journey, but a short and urgent sprint. This led my logical mind to the next, unavoidable question. If there is only one life and it is followed by a judgment, then the most important task is no longer to escape the cycle, but to be found worthy at the judgment. I had spent my life seeking to understand and end suffering, or dukkha, as it is called in the Pali texts. I believed that suffering was the fundamental problem of existence, born from craving, desire, and ignorance. I believed that by following the Noble Eightfold Path, I could extinguish these causes and thereby end the suffering. Jesus, sensing the intellectual and spiritual framework I was operating from, addressed it with both respect and a clarifying firmness. Kalen, his thought was compassionate. Your understanding is not entirely wrong. The suffering you see in the world is real. The pain caused by selfish craving and ignorance is a powerful and destructive force. You have diagnosed the symptoms with great wisdom. But you have mistaken the symptoms for the disease itself. The garden around us seemed to fade and the vision changed. I found myself standing on the edge of a vast, impossibly wide chasm. The chasm was filled with a roiling, silent darkness, and it seemed to stretch into infinity in both directions. On the far side, so distant it seemed unattainable, was a source of brilliant, beautiful, and holy light. I knew I was looking at the presence of the Holy Father, the Creator I had just witnessed. And I was on the wrong side of the chasm. This chasm, Jesus explained, his presence a comfort beside me in this desolate place, is what your teachings call suffering, but its true name is sin. It is the separation between a perfectly holy God and a creation that has chosen to turn away from him. He then explained the fundamental difference, a difference I had never conceived of. In my Buddhist understanding, the problem was ignorance, a lack of understanding of the true nature of reality. It was a philosophical problem. But Jesus explained that sin was not a problem of the mind, but a problem of the will. It was not a mistake, it was a rebellion. It was a personal offense against a personal God. It was a broken relationship. I then saw other souls on my side of the chasm, all desperately trying to cross. I saw a man diligently building a bridge out of his good deeds, his acts of charity and kindness. But the chasm was infinitely wide, and his bridge, no matter how well-intentioned, always fell short, crumbling into the darkness below. I saw another figure, a monk who looked much like myself, sitting in perfect meditative posture, trying to achieve a state of consciousness so pure that he could simply float across the divide. But he remained bound by the gravity of his own imperfect nature, unable to leave the ground. Do you see? Jesus asked gently. No amount of human effort, no matter how sincere, how disciplined, or how noble, can bridge an infinite gap. The disease is not a psychological flaw that can be overcome with mindfulness. It is a legal and relational barrier that you are utterly powerless to cross on your own. For the first time in my life, I understood true despair. In my old belief system, the solution, however difficult, was within my own grasp. Now I saw that the true problem was not my perception, the problem was my very nature, and I had no solution. My soul stood at the edge of that great chasm of sin, stripped of its lifelong philosophy and naked in its own helplessness. My path, the Noble Eightfold Path, was a system designed to generate good karma, to build a bridge of merit that would, over countless lifetimes, finally carry me across the river of suffering. But I was no longer looking at a river that could be crossed. I was looking at an infinite chasm of separation from a holy God, and the bridge I had spent my life building was revealed to be nothing but a handful of dust. I turned my awareness to Jesus, my mind a storm of questions. What about karma? The thought was a desperate plea for an answer. The law of cause and effect, good deeds leading to good outcomes, is that not a universal law? Jesus did not dismiss the concept. Instead, he honored the truth within it before revealing its ultimate inadequacy. The law of cause and effect is real, Kalen. His thought was clear and logical. The universe my father created is an orderly one. An action produces a reaction. Kindness often begets kindness, and hatred often begets more hatred. In the physical world, this law is a powerful teacher. His compassion was evident. He was not mocking my old beliefs, but gently, firmly, leading me to a deeper truth. But you have mistaken a law of earthly consequence for a law of eternal salvation, and they are not the same. To help me understand, he gave me a simple, powerful metaphor, one that my logical mind could process. The scene shifted. I saw a man standing before a great and mighty king in a vast throne room. The king was holy, just, and perfect. The man, a subject of the king, owed an infinite debt. I was made to understand that this debt represented his sin, his rebellion against the perfect king. The man then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. "These are my good deeds," the man said to the king. "My acts of charity, my moments of kindness, my years of disciplined meditation." I watched as the man began to count his coins, placing them one by one at the foot of the throne. It was an impressive pile, a lifetime of merit. Now Jesus asked my soul, can that finite pile of coins ever hope to pay off an infinite debt? The answer was immediate and absolute: no. It was a mathematical impossibility. A finite number, no matter how large, can never equal infinity. "Now you see," Jesus explained, as the vision of the throne room faded and we were back at the edge of the chasm. "Your good deeds, your good karma, are a beautiful thing in the world. They are a kindness to others and a discipline to your own soul, but they are a finite currency. Sin, because it is an offense against an infinitely holy God, creates an infinite debt. You cannot pay an infinite debt with a finite currency. The math simply does not work," I finally understood. I had spent my life trying to fill an ocean with a thimble. I had been trying to solve an infinite problem with a finite solution. The law of karma was real, but it could only ever balance the scales of earthly life. It had no power, no currency, in the eternal court of a holy God. The chasm remained, and I was still on the wrong side, with nothing in my hands but a pocketful of worthless coins. I stood at the edge of that chasm, a bankrupt soul. My lifelong pursuit of accumulating good karma, of balancing the scales, was revealed to be a fool's errand, an exercise in impossible mathematics. The despair I had felt earlier returned, but it was now sharper, more defined. I not only saw the problem of the separation, but I now understood with a crushing, logical certainty that I was utterly and completely powerless to solve it. My system of belief had no answer for this. It had only ever told me to try harder, to be better, to accumulate more merit. But I had seen the truth. A mountain of merit was still just a pile of dust at the edge of an infinite abyss. So there is no hope. The thought was a silent, final admission of defeat. The chasm cannot be crossed. Not by your own efforts. Jesus's thought was not a condemnation, but a gentle correction, a turning of my focus. You are correct. You cannot build a bridge to my Father, but you have not understood. He has built a bridge to you. The scene before me shifted. I was still standing at the edge of the great chasm of sin, but now a new and singular object appeared, spanning the impossible divide. It was a bridge, but it was made of a rough, dark wood. It was a cross. It was planted firmly on my side, the side of sin and death, and its top beam reached all the way across the chasm, touching the brilliant, holy light of the Father's presence on the other side. It was the only way across. It was the only bridge. I, a Buddhist monk, had always viewed the cross as a symbol of another religion, an icon that held no power for me. But now, with my spiritual eyes opened, I saw it for what it truly was. I saw a vision of Jesus himself on that cross, and I was shown the great, divine transaction that had occurred there. I saw all the sin of the world, the anger, the lust, the greed, the pride, every dark and selfish act, flowing like a river of filth and being poured onto him. I saw the infinite debt that humanity owed to a holy God being placed upon his shoulders. He, who was perfect and sinless, was taking the full, crushing weight of all our bad karma. And then I saw the Father on the other side of the chasm, who is so holy he cannot look upon sin, turn his face away. I felt the agony of that moment, the agony of a perfect son being separated from his perfect father for the first and only time in all of eternity. It was a heartbreak that shook the foundations of the cosmos. "This is the bridge, Kalen," Jesus explained, his voice filled with the memory of that sacred agony and the triumph of its completion. "This is why I had to come. Your good deeds could not pay the infinite debt of your sin, so I, the Son of the King, paid it for you. My death on the cross was not a tragedy, it was a transaction. It was the only payment great enough to satisfy the perfect justice of a holy God. I saw it then with a clarity that overwhelmed my soul. The cross was the only answer to the impossible math. A finite man could not pay an infinite debt, but an infinite God who had become a man could. It was a divine solution that had never even been a category in my old belief system. I was not meant to build a bridge myself. I was simply meant to walk across the one that had already been built for me. The vision of the cross, the bridge of sacrifice spanning that impossible chasm, held my entire being in a state of reverent, stunned silence. As a Buddhist, I had spent my life engaged in a system of spiritual accounting, a meticulous and exhausting effort to balance the karmic scales. The idea that the entire, infinite debt of sin could be paid in a single, divine transaction was a concept so radical, so completely outside my framework, that my mind struggled to grasp it. All my years of discipline, of meditation, of striving, had they all been for nothing? Was the path not a mountain to be climbed, but a gift to be received? Jesus, sensing my internal struggle to reconcile two completely opposite worldviews, then crystallized the difference for me with a simple, powerful illustration. Kalen, his thought was gentle, like a teacher helping a student see a difficult concept in a new light. Your entire life, you have been trying to climb a great and unclimbable mountain. You have done it with sincerity, with discipline, and with a noble heart. You have sought to perfect yourself, to discipline your mind, to purify your actions, all in the hope that you could, by your own effort, reach the summit of enlightenment. As he spoke, I saw a vision of a sheer, impossibly high cliff face. At the bottom, I saw a figure who represented me, a monk, diligently trying to find handholds, slowly, painfully trying to ascend. It was a picture of exhausting, upward striving. You have been trying to ascend to God, Jesus explained. But the gospel, the good news that I have come to declare, is not about man ascending to God. It is about God descending to man. The vision changed. I was now at the bottom of a deep, dark pit. I looked up and could see the light so very far away. I was trapped, helpless, with no way to climb out on my own. This, I understood, was the true state of my soul, of every soul, separated from God by the pit of sin. The striving, the meditation, the good karma, it was all just me, packing helplessly at the bottom of the pit. Then, from the light above, a rope was lowered down to me. It was a rescue rope, strong and sure, its end offered freely. Do you see the difference? The truth of his words resonated in my soul. Enlightenment is about you, by your own power, climbing out of the pit. Salvation is about me, by my power, reaching down to pull you out. Your path is a ladder that you try to build. My path is a rescue rope that I lower. All that is required of you is to stop trying to build and simply take hold of the rope. That was it, that was the core of it all, the fundamental difference between a religion of works and a religion of grace. My entire life had been a noble, sincere, and ultimately futile attempt to save myself. And here, Jesus was offering to do for me what I could never, ever do for myself. All the striving, all the effort, all the years of disciplined self-denial were revealed not as a pathway to salvation, but as the very pride that had kept me from simply crying out for a savior. I had been trying to empty myself to become nothing, when the real path was to admit my emptiness so that I could be filled by someone. The vision of the rescue rope, the beautiful and humbling truth of grace, dissolved the last of my intellectual resistance. My lifetime of striving to achieve a state of non-being was revealed as a profound misunderstanding of the very nature of reality. The goal wasn't to empty myself into a void, but to be filled by a person. And this led to the next great question, a question that my former worldview could never have even conceived. If the ultimate reality was not an impersonal system of karma, but a personal savior who reaches down, then who was the one doing the reaching? Who was this God? In Buddhism, the concept of a personal creator God was a non sequitur, an unnecessary complication. The universe simply was, but I had already seen that it was not. I had seen a creation, which meant there had to be a creator. You have spent your life meditating on an ultimate reality that is a formless, silent void. The thought of Jesus was a gentle illumination in my mind. But the one true God, my Father, is not an empty silence. He is a symphony of love. He is not a solitary force, but a perfect relationship. And then he began to explain to me the concept of the Trinity. For my Buddhist mind, which saw all things as ultimately one and empty of inherent self, this was a difficult concept. How could God be both one and three? In my old faith, this would have been dismissed as a logical contradiction. But Jesus explained it not as a math problem, but as a relationship. He showed me a vision of three distinct, brilliant beings of light, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all separate, yet all perfectly and eternally united in a self-giving, outward-flowing dance of pure love. I saw that the very nature of God was not solitary power, but a community of love. He was not a distant, static, unknowable force. He was a dynamic, relational, and loving being. This is why he created, Jesus explained, the truth of it unfolding in my soul with breathtaking beauty. The love within the Godhead is so perfect and so overflowing that he created the universe and mankind to share in that love. You were not a cosmic accident, Kalen. You were a deliberate thought, a desired child, created by a father who wanted a personal relationship with you, to invite you into the dance of his own perfect love. This truth struck at the very heart of the loneliness that is inherent in a godless universe. I had spent my life seeking peace in detachment, in becoming an island of calm in a sea of suffering. Jesus was showing me that true peace came from connection, from a loving relationship with the personal God who had made me for that very purpose. He then explained his own role in this divine community of love. That is why I had to come, he said. When mankind chose to turn away to break that relationship, the chasm of sin you saw was created. I, the Son, came to earth as both fully God and fully man to be the bridge. To live the perfect life you could not live, and to die the death you deserved to die, so that the broken relationship could be restored. It was so radically different from the distant, judgmental concept of Allah I had studied in my comparative religion classes, and equally different from the impersonal, karmic law of my Buddhist faith. This was a God who did not remain distant, but who actively and sacrificially pursued his creation, a God who would become one of us in order to bring us back to himself. The God Jesus was showing me was not a philosophical concept to be understood, but a loving Father to be known. The revelation of a personal, loving, relational God who actively pursues his creation was the final, decisive blow to my old worldview. My entire life had been a quest to find truth, and I was now standing in the presence of the one who claimed to be truth itself. I felt a sense of profound peace, but also a deep and sorrowful question. What about the path I had so sincerely followed? What about the Buddha, the man I had revered as the great, enlightened teacher? Jesus, in his infinite compassion, knew I needed to understand. He did not mock my old faith. Instead, with the sadness of a doctor explaining a wrong diagnosis, he began to show me the truth. Kalen, his thought was gentle, but it carried an unsparing clarity. The path you walked was noble in its intent to end suffering. But it was a path designed by a man, and no path made by man can lead to God. He then showed me a vision of the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. I saw him not as the almost divine figure I had studied, but as a man. A brilliant, compassionate, and deeply thoughtful man, yes, but a man nonetheless. I saw his own sincere quest for answers, his heart broken by the suffering he saw in the world. But then Jesus showed me the spiritual reality behind his enlightenment. I saw that in his intense meditation and self-denial, he had indeed touched a spiritual truth, the truth of the emptiness of a world without God, the reality of suffering, and the futility of worldly desire. But I also saw that he had stopped short. He had diagnosed the symptoms of the world's sickness, but he had never found the cure because he had never found the Creator. He had mistaken the peace of detachment from a broken world for the true peace that comes only from being reconciled to the God who made it. He was a man searching for a light in a dark room, Jesus explained, but he did not know that the light had a name. And so, the path he created, though filled with wisdom, leads not to a person but to a concept, not to a father but to an emptiness. Jesus then showed me how, over the centuries, the original teachings of this man had been mixed with other philosophies and pagan ideas, how legends had been added, until the man himself was worshipped as a god, an act that the original Siddhartha would have rejected. He showed me how the pursuit of nothingness had, in a tragic irony, become a religion, with its own rituals, traditions, and hierarchies, the very attachments that the Buddha had sought to escape. It is the enemy's most subtle deception, Jesus communicated, to offer a path that seems wise, that promotes peace and self-control, but that ultimately keeps the seeker's eyes turned inward on his own efforts, his own mindfulness, his own path to enlightenment, rather than turning his eyes upward to the only one who can save him. I saw with a heartbreaking clarity that the path I had been on, for all its nobility and discipline, was a beautiful and intricate cage, designed to keep me so focused on saving myself that I would never realize I needed a savior. The truth of what Jesus had shown me was a clean and sorrowful wound. The path I had dedicated my entire adult life to, the philosophy I had mastered and taught, was a beautiful, intricate, and ultimately empty cage. I felt a wave of grief for my wasted years, for the sincere but misguided devotion I had poured into a path that led not to a person, but to a void. But Jesus, in his infinite mercy, did not leave me in that place of regret. Instead, he showed me how even my mistaken journey had a purpose in his greater plan. Kalen, his thought was no longer just that of a teacher, but of a master strategist, a king who redeems all things. Your 30 years of sincere seeking were not a waste, they were a preparation. I did not understand. How could my years spent walking in the wrong direction be a preparation? There are millions of souls in the world like you, he explained, and he showed me a vision of them. I saw people in yoga studios in California, in ashrams in India, in meditation centers in my own home country. I saw them reading books on mindfulness, seeking spiritual gurus, and dedicating their lives to the pursuit of a higher consciousness, of enlightenment, of connection to a universal force. They were sincere, they were dedicated, and they were, like I had been, lost in a beautiful and complex forest, unable to see the one true path that was right beside them. They are my children, Jesus said, and I could feel the deep, yearning love he had for them, and their hearts are hungry for truth. But the enemy has created 1,000 beautiful, spiritual, and godless paths to keep them from finding me. You, he continued, and I felt a sense of purpose being placed upon my soul like a mantle, understand their language. You understand their hunger, you understand the nobility of their search. I have brought you here and I have shown you the truth, not just for your own salvation, but so you can return and be a witness to them. You will be a bridge. I saw what he meant. I could speak to them not as an outsider, but as a former insider. I could honor the sincerity of their search while gently, lovingly, pointing out the beautiful lie they had been sold. I could explain from my own experience the profound and life-altering difference between seeking an impersonal enlightenment and finding a personal savior. I could tell them that the peace they were seeking was not a state of mind to be achieved, but a person to be known. My entire misguided life was being redeemed and repurposed in that moment, transformed from a tragic mistake into a unique qualification for a holy mission. The broken parts of my story were about to become the most powerful parts of my testimony. You will go back, he commissioned me, and you will be a light to those who are lost in the spiritual twilight. You will tell them that the truth they are seeking has a name. The weight and purpose of my new mission settled upon my soul. I was no longer Kalen the monk, a seeker of the void. I was Kalen the witness, a messenger for the king. And with this new identity came the sorrowful but necessary understanding that my time in this place of perfect peace was ending. I felt the gentle but irresistible pull of the physical world begin to tug at my consciousness. The thought of returning was a complex agony. I ached at the idea of leaving his presence, of trading this reality of pure light and love for the gray, shadowy world I had left. But unlike my previous desire for an empty nirvana, this was a purposeful sorrow, the grief of a soldier leaving his king's side to go to the battlefield he has been assigned. I was ready. The journey back was a swift, silent reversal. The garden of light faded, and I was once more in the pearlescent tunnel, moving not toward the light, but away from it. Then came the darkness, the noise, and the brutal, claustrophobic compression of my boundless spirit being forced back into the confines of a broken, 60-year-old body. I awoke with a gasp, a ragged, desperate breath that burned in my lungs. I was not in the silent, sandalwood-scented meditation hall. I was in a sterile, white hospital room, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic. A young doctor was shining a bright, painful light into my eyes. "He's awake," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and pure, clinical shock. "His pupils are responsive. I don't understand." The days that followed were a disorienting blur of tests and baffled doctors. They had no medical explanation for my survival. A ruptured aneurysm of that magnitude, they said, should have been instantly fatal. And even if not, the time my brain was without oxygen should have left me in a vegetative state. They called it a one-in-a-million miracle. I knew it was a divine appointment. The hardest part, however, came when I was released and returned to the monastery, the only home I had known for 30 years. I walked back through the familiar wooden gates, but I was a stranger. The peaceful silence I had once cherished now felt incomplete, a silence of absence, not a silence of presence. I tried to explain what had happened, what I had seen. I sat with my brothers, the men I had shared my life with, and I told them of the personal, loving Creator God. I told them of the chasm of sin, the futility of self-effort, and the beautiful, illogical grace of the cross. I told them about Jesus. They listened, their faces a mixture of concern and pity. They were kind, but they did not understand. The abbot, a man I had revered for decades, took me aside. "Kalen," he said gently, "you have experienced a great trauma. The mind, in such moments, can create powerful visions, what the texts call maras, illusions designed to distract us from the true path." They believed I had been deceived by a demon, or that my mind had simply broken. They urged me to meditate more deeply, to redouble my efforts to find the path I had clearly lost. It was the most profound and painful loneliness I have ever felt. I was surrounded by my family, yet we were now speaking different spiritual languages. I was telling them I had found a person, and they were telling me I had been distracted by an illusion on my path to finding nothing. I knew then that I could not stay. My mission was not here. Leaving the monastery was the hardest and most painful act of my life. It was a kind of death in itself. I walked away from the only home I had known as an adult, leaving behind my brothers, my routine, and the entire framework of my identity. I had a small amount of money saved from before my time as a monk, and with it, I found a small, simple apartment in a nearby town. The world, with all its noise, its ambition, and its distractions, was a shock to my system after 30 years of cloistered silence. But the promise Jesus had given me, "I am with you always," was my anchor in that disorienting sea. I found a small, quiet church, and for the first time in my life, I began to read the Bible not as a text for comparative study, but as a love letter from the God who had met me in eternity. My life was given a new purpose. I began to write. I wrote down everything I had seen, everything Jesus had shown me, with the methodical precision of a scholar and the earnest heart of a new believer. I started a small website, a quiet corner of the internet where I shared my story and contrasted the theological frameworks of Buddhism and Christianity, not with anger or arrogance, but from the perspective of a sincere seeker who had found the unexpected answer. My mission, as Jesus had given it to me, was to be a bridge, and slowly, other seekers began to find their way to my story. I received emails from yoga instructors, from people practicing transcendental meditation, from former New Age followers, and even from other Buddhist monks who were privately struggling with the same questions I had. They all sensed that something was missing, that the peace they were striving for felt impersonal and incomplete. Which brings me to today. It has been 5 years since my journey to the edge of eternity and back. My life is no longer one of quiet, monastic detachment. It is one of active, joyful engagement. The peace I have now is not the fragile, self-manufactured calm of a still mind, but the robust, unshakable peace that comes from knowing you are loved and held by the very creator of the universe. I now stand before groups like this, groups of sincere and dedicated spiritual seekers, to share my testimony. I look out at your faces and I see the same hunger for truth, the same noble desire to end suffering that drove my own life for so many years. And so I end my story with this final, loving plea, the very heart of the message I was sent back to deliver. The ultimate reality is not an impersonal force. The truth is not a concept. The peace you are so desperately seeking is not a state of being to be achieved. It is a person to be known. His name is Jesus, and he is waiting for you.